You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Thursday evening, folks. It's Thursday, the 11th of June, and I want to welcome you to the program. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com to come on over and see everything there is to know about Odyssey. See all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. At the same time, you could be watching over on my YouTube channel. We're simulcasting this broadcast in video over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. You can come on over and join the chat room there, which is already active tonight, and meet some of the other Intrepids and enjoy the show there. And it doesn't get too overcrowded over there. This show, as I'm told, we have listeners into the thousands, multiple thousands, but we get about 13 to 30 people that come over and join the chat room. You can be the 31st if you'd like. Come on over and join the conversation. And tonight we're going to continue talking a little bit about dreams. I dreamed a weird-ass dream was the title of last night's show. And as promised, we're going to talk about a little bit of the mystical side of dreaming today. And that mystical side could get a little wonky or woo-filled for some people. We're going to talk about some symbolism, some that doesn't even appear in dreams but has to do with dreaming. And we're going to talk about that spiritual side of dreaming. Is there a spiritual side to dreams? Are there contacts that can be made with us through dreams? We've read so many stories and heard so many tales of how gods, angels, demons, all kinds of beings, celestial beings, will speak to us through dreams. And while there is no way to really prove that, when I talk about proof, I'm not talking about belief. I'm talking about scientific methodology. You can either chalk dreams up to chemical analysis of the brain, chemical reactions, what's the word I'm looking for? The things that go on in our brain to help us cope with things in real life or process things we've experienced or just keep the mind active. And the other side of that is, are there contacts in dreams? Are there spiritual elements from outside that affect us in our dreams? And I've got some stories to tell as well as a little bit of information to impart to you on this. Also tonight, and I'll take this up at the beginning of the second segment, as promised, I talked about this book when we were talking about reading to our kids. This is the book that was one of our favorites when my older children from my previous marriage were little kids. We read this all the time, The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe. And I'll do my best to read it using the voices I used when I read it to my children. And this is a wonderfully illustrated picture book with a wonderful little ghost tale. And I read it last night to my little kids, and they loved it. And my little 5-year-old, Ellery, as I was reading, she just turned to me. We had it laid flat on the bed, propped up with a pillow, everybody laying down like this as we're reading the book, and my little Ellery turned during one of the... First, she wanted to be able to turn the pages. Can I turn the pages? Yeah, you can turn the pages. And somewhere in the process of reading the book, she looked over and she goes, "Dad, I love you." I go, "Hey, I love you too. Here's what Nicholas Grebe had to say." And so it's a fun little book and one I would highly recommend. The copy I had that I read to my older daughters, who are now 28, as you know, and my son Sam, When my daughters moved out of the house, that copy left the house with them. And years later, they were writing to me and saying they had a fun argument over who got to get the book. They found the book in one of their boxes in their warehouse, and they had to just about do rock, paper, scissors to decide who got to keep the book and take it to their house. So it's a good book. We'll read that at the beginning of the second segment tonight. But for now, let's get into talking about a bit of the spiritual side of dreaming. Now, we've talked about, I told you about my dream. You've heard about some of my weird-ass dreams I've had. The archaeologists, the bare-chested comedian, things like that, and how those all dopily mixed in together, and still have to figure out the meaning of that dream. Also, and remember, I wasn't a participant, I was an observer with a bunch of other archaeologists. And so we'll put that one aside. We've made lots of ado about that over on the Situation Room. But other weird dreams. I had a dream 2 nights ago about being a concentration camp prisoner during Nazi Germany. It wasn't a reincarnation type of dream because there were other weird messages in it and weird things going on. And a lot of people I know were participants in that dream, as I was part of the dream. I was not observing it from afar, but I was actually there visualizing it. I was in the dream. I had a dream last night that was a little disturbing, not a nightmare, but something about having built a new house and all of a sudden something I had done on the house to either turn on the water or something like that. And we were in a neighborhood, by the way. Think of your kind of upper middle class neighborhood. Big house, and I had turned on the water, and the next thing you know, I'm standing out in the street with somebody who, in my memory, looked like Chris Pine, the guy who played Captain Kirk in the new J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies, was standing there with me because having had turned on the water, all of a sudden the whole neighborhood was flooding. And it's like we were standing in the middle of a raging torrent of a river up to almost here. And I'm looking back at my house and the door is open and water's gushing in. And we're in the middle of the street, this neighborhood street, as water, this river is flowing down and it's tumultuous. But it's not dragging us along, but we are fighting against it. And I'm saying I have got to get over to the house and make sure I can either shut this off or make sure not everything I own is ruined. And then I remember later in the dream, I woke up from that and I fell back to sleep, and I'm in the house and everything was fine. And nothing was damaged, but that outside the house was this torrent of flood that I didn't know if I actually caused it or not, or if something I did by turning on my water broke a dam or something. So none of that was resolved in the dream. So we all have these weird dreams, and we can say, oh, well, I know, the water stands for emotion, it's tumultuous outside yourself, outside your home. But it didn't affect your home. It didn't affect who you are and where you are. Maybe that's an interpretation of it. I don't know, because I haven't put a lot of brain power into it yet. So I want to find out what is the mystical interpretation of our dreams beyond just what the subconscious does. Is there a mystical interpretation to our dreaming? And I think all of us can look at this stuff and ask those questions. Is it impossible to say that somebody or something outside ourselves, maybe outside this dimension, is speaking to us through certain dreams? Not every dream. Not every dream of a flooding torrent running through your neighborhood, or feeling like you're part of a concentration camp, or watching weird comedic archaeologists having sex in an old building and being shocked by it. None of those may be messages of any kind. They just might be the unconscious or subconscious dealing with weird things that we have going on in life and trying to give us messages. So what about the contact dream? Things like that. I'm going to give you a little story about something, a dream I had a very long time ago. Now, I have mentioned before that in passing in other stories, my aunt passed away rather suddenly in 1995. So we're talking, how many years ago is that? 25 years ago. And she was about 11 years older than I am, so I'm 59 now. She'd be 70 this year. At the time, 25 years earlier, she was 45 years old, 46, right in there. And she died rather suddenly, and it was unexpected, and it was very heart-wrenching. This is my aunt, who was the crazy aunt. My mom's sister, she was a witch, although not affiliated with any organization. She's the one who would do the tarot readings and do the spirit board readings and things like that. And she had a lot of knowledge about ghosts and experiences with ghosts. And I can't say she got me into this stuff, but once I started experiencing some things, she was my conduit for going and talking about these things. And I remember in the dream, we weren't present when she died. It was her body started shutting down. She was also a closet meth user, and we didn't know this about her. And she was an alcoholic. And her body shut down. She called me one day and said, "My feet are starting to swell up and I don't feel so good. I'm going to go to the doctor." And then she went to the doctor and she said, "The doc says my kidneys are backing up," and all of this. And then the next thing we knew, the next day, they had put her into a coma, a deliberate coma, for some reason about how to treat her. And the next day she was dead. And so she died rather suddenly. And I remember I talked to her one time on the phone in that 2-day period. She was in the hospital before the coma and said, "I think I'm feeling a little better," but she was very disoriented and she was mumbling, and "I feel a little better today." She said, I think things will be okay. And then she was dead within 48 hours. And so I had a dream about, I want to say, it was the same year. It wasn't immediately afterwards, but it was some number of weeks or possibly months after she passed away. And in this dream, you know how holidays are when you get together with the family at somebody's house, grandma's house or aunt's house or your own house. And if you lived up here in the Great White North, Thanksgiving time, there was usually snow on the ground. And toward evening, you would have the table that's all still full of food, and everybody's already eaten the feast several hours earlier, but been picking off all the stuff at the table for a few hours. And you go to another table and you start playing board games or watching football or something like that. We were in I was in the dream, I was in our old house, and it was one of those settings. It was after a holiday meal. And you could see the spread laid out on the table that's all been gone through already. And the windows had a bluish glow to them, which you would see an awful lot in up here at holiday time. When it got dusky outside, the sun went down. It wasn't pitch black outside yet because of the snow on the ground and the color in the sky. Everything, the light all turned kind of bluish coming in the windows. And so that was the setting. And we were in our old house with the wood floors and the wood, lot of woodwork around the windows, old woodwork from a turn of the 19th to the 20th century house that was built, and wood divisions and curio cabinets and things like that all built in to the rooms. And that was the setting. And I was alone there, although people were around. I knew they were around. And I heard the phone ringing. And I'm looking around and for some reason can't find the phone. And then I went over to the living room and the dining room. Think of an old bungalow-style house. That's what this was. The living room and the dining room, one big room, but divided by two little cabinets on the sides and the big wooden arch in the middle. And the living room was on that side. And I'm standing at the dining room table on this side, and I'm hearing the phone. And I finally walk over to one of these little curio cabinets, which was only about 4 feet tall, and I looked over the top of it, and behind the big overstuffed chair that was in the corner was the phone down on the floor. But it wasn't plugged into anything. And I reached down over that cabinet and I picked up the phone and I answered, hello. And it was my aunt, Andy. And I heard her voice and she sounded very confused. She said, this is Andy. And she said, I think I'm dead. Yeah. And then her voice brightens up. She goes, yeah, I'm dead. I died. That was the kind of personality she had. She said, I died. She said, but I just called to tell you I'm okay. And I love you. Click. And I woke up. And I thought, wow, what was that dream all about? Now, back in 95, I wasn't into all this trying to decipher these things on a more spiritual level. I was still just coming out of being in youth ministry, being in the church, and I was questioning a lot of things. And I presented that dream a few years later to a friend who was in the know about all this, and she said it was definitely a contact dream. Your aunt was contacting you. Now, can I prove that? No. But it does fit some of the criteria for those who believe in these sorts of contacts. And so when I thought about it, immediately that presence of mind rushed into me. And I said, yeah, that was a contact. My aunt contacted me. And my cousin, when I told him, her son, my contemporary, I told him about this dream. It was his mom, Andy. And he said, I had a weird dream too. He says, we're sitting in... My aunt was a musician, by the way, and she was big into the Beatles. She was a flower child in the 60s and all of that. And she loved the Beatles, and she played a lot of their music. She was in a band. She was a guitarist and a singer. And so my cousin said he had a dream where he's riding in a limo alone in the back seat, and in the front seat, which was a bench seat in the front, was John Lennon and my aunt, and they were talking. And he said, Mom, is that John Lennon? And she turned around and went, shh, we're talking. I'll tell you about it in a minute. And he said that was the entirety of his dream. And so are these contact dreams? So the question starts to be raised. If you grew up in Western culture and someone asked you to list the 10 most important events in your life, chances are you wouldn't include anything that happened in a dream. Because Western society, our society, is dominated by a more materialistic worldview in which only objective events are deemed to be real. We tend to dismiss dreams as being these mere subjective phenomena, chemical reactions in the brain, figments of our imagination with little or no relevance for the actual conduct of our lives. It's the things that are used to process our lives, not direct them. And the one exception to this rule are those schools of psychotherapy which value dreams as a way to access unconscious contents of the psyche. But even here, except for maybe followers of Carl Jung, Jungians, the aim is usually restricted to improving a person's ability to relate to the real world of family, friends, work, and society. And any suggestion that dreams might serve as a conduit for spiritual guidance, emanating from a transcendent source of some kind, just simply don't fit into our limited paradigm here in the West. And so when we start interpreting dreams on a spiritual level, or spiritual content meant to tell us something, we are locked into our society's values, our society's norms, our society's practices, the, if you will, the, what's the word for a non-spirit, secular side of interpretations of things, because we live in a society that's based on material things. I'm not talking about money necessarily there, just material, hardcore, fact, science. And so this attitude toward dreams in the modern West, it contrasts sharply with that of virtually all other human societies, which have been based on sacred worldviews, and regarding dreams as indispensable windows to invisible realms of the cosmos. and this has been especially true of the world's great mystics, most of whose biographies are peppered with accounts of significant dreams, conveying various kinds of teachings, instructions, advice, and things like that that come from their dreams, that direct them from the dream world. And so before his awakening, for example, the Buddha had a series of 5 dreams foretelling that he would attain full enlightenment and become a renowned teacher, while Socrates insisted that dreams guided him throughout his whole teaching career. He said, "I maintain that I have been commanded by the God to do this, through oracles and dreams and in every way in which some divine influence or other has ever commanded a man to do anything." And here's what Maryam Abdun, the wife of Sufi master Ibn Arabi, reported about a dream that she had. She said, "I've seen in my sleep someone whom I have never seen in the flesh, but who appears to me in my moments of ecstasy. He asked me whether I was aspiring to the way, the Sufi path, to which I replied that I was, but that I didn't know by what means to arrive at it. He then told me that I would come to it through 5 things: trust, certainty, patience, resolution, and veracity." Now, that was her dream. You ever had a dream like that was specific like that? So, too, the great Kabbalist Isaac of Acre wrote this of a dream in which the angel Metatron appeared to him. And he said, "While I was yet sleeping, I, Isaac of Acre, saw Metatron, the prince of the face, and I sat before him, and he taught me and promised me many good things that would come to me." So these are a couple of examples, 3 examples of dreams that great mystics have had, saying where they have had contact with something that is spoken directly to them. Do you remember in the Jesus story in the Bible that Pilate, after Jesus is brought to him and he's got to render some judgment, his wife had a dream. And in the dream, she was told, and she told this to her husband, Pilate, the governor. She said, "Don't have anything to do with this Jesus. Walk away from it, or you're going to break." The intent was there would be calamity that would be brought on us because of it. And so, who speaks to us through our dreams? Of course, as the mystics themselves know, not all dreams are spiritual. St. Augustine, for example, he divided dreams into 2 main categories: those that are true and those that are false, while Tibetan Buddhists distinguish between clarity dreams and dreams that are merely karmic, or as we might say, egoic, E-G-O-I-C, egoic in nature. So the first question for anyone wishing to tap into this ancient source of wisdom is, how can you tell spiritual from non-spiritual or egoic dreams? How can you tell the difference? My dream of my aunt, the dreams I've had the last couple of nights, which, by the way, are the most vivid dreams I've had in a long time. Are there meanings behind them that are deeper? The one with the contact, I was being spoken to directly. The last 2 nights were observing or participating in weird events. So the primary difference between spiritual and egoic dreams lies in their content. Think of this way, folks. When you dream, the difference between the egoic dream and the spiritual is the content of the dream and how you interpret the content. Egoic dreams are woven from the fabric of our personal histories, and we reflect the self-centered concerns that arise out of our worldly pursuits or the things that are going on in the world around us and how we are reacting to those things. It's our brain processing information. Perhaps the clearest examples of such dreams are the ones we tend to have when our minds are preoccupied with some ongoing crisis or occurring in our work state. For instance, if you're grappling with some difficult problem at work, your dreaming mind is apt to continue to try to figure it out while you sleep. So similar if you lose an important argument with someone during the day, chances are you're going to replay it in your dreams and hoping to arrive at a more satisfactory outcome. Because the situations we encounter in these kinds of dreams are simply continuations of our waking experiences. And they rarely need any interpretation at all. And you know what? We're already at the end of our first segment. And we got to go out to break. When we come back, I'm going to read The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe, and then we're going to pick up this thing on dreams again and the spirituality of dreams. So sit tight. We'll be right back. All right, gang, thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. You also are watching the video simulcast. Whew, I sometimes talk faster than my brain's working. And that's over on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Come on over, watch the visual, and join the live chat room that's going on right now and discuss some of these things. Now, I want to get right into this because I want to cover the rest of the information on dreams as well, but I promised we'd read this book right now, The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe, during this second segment. So I'm going to read this to you. Now, put on your little nighttime caps and get ready for a nighttime story. I put it at the end of the show and close with this, but I never know how far I'm going to go with the information in the show, and I didn't want us to run out of time. So let's read this now at the beginning of this second half. We were talking about last week about reading to our kids and how important that is. And this is a book that was very popular with my little kids, The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe. And it's written by Tony Johnston and illustrated by S.D. Schindler. And I love the illustrations in this book. He does a lot of pen and ink and watercolor wash here. So at the very beginning of the book, he says, in colonial times, this was the little intro in the book. He says, in colonial times, quiet Massachusetts valleys, dark with trees, threaded with rivers, and often cloaked in fog, gave rise to thoughts of the supernatural. There among hidden hills, tales of haunts and ghosts abounded. Tales such as this one, The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe. Now, I'm going to show you these pictures as we go. This isn't quite like being here, but I'll show you these pictures. This is the first 2-page spread of the book, and you can see these gorgeous. Let's see if I can focus the book in the right place without the light blotting it out. There you can see the moon is out, And this is his illustrations of the Massachusetts countryside and the house of Nicholas Grebe. And there is Nicholas Grebe down in the window on the lower right. Or is it the lower left, the way you're seeing it? And this first page says, "Toward year's end, above the rambling farmhouse, the moon rose cold and still. It shone through a window and onto the bed within, where the farmer, Nicholas Grebe, lay sleeping. In the luminous gloom, precisely at midnight, the old man gave up the ghost. That is to say, he died. And the next day dawned exceedingly cold." Now you can see the next day, and there's all his relatives rushing in. "The next day dawned exceedingly cold. Unfortunately, as we shall later see, his shivering family hurriedly dug a grave, buried him with a prayer, and hastened back into the warmth of the fire. And outside, beneath pewter skies, Nicholas Grebe was left to rest. A headstone with an angel marked his grave. And there's the grave of Nicholas Grebe, the shallow grave in the cold, hard winter ground, and his relatives going back inside." Now, here's where the story starts to get intriguing. 1 year later, here, I'm going to take the dust jacket off this book while I'm reading it because it's getting in the way, getting messed up. So, goes to Nicholas Grebe, hardcover. Now, 1 year later, and let me show you the 2-page spread. I love the illustrations in this book. Now, you see there's the little dog right here by my finger, the grave of Nicholas Grebe right there. There's the house, and there's people in the house. The moon is out again. That's that silvery moon on the landscape. You see the shadows cast by the moon. So 1 year later, to the very day, the family gathered at the farm. Everyone feasted and toasted the departed man, and in the midst of the festivities, and by peculiar coincidence, at the very stroke of 12, the little dog felt the desire to go outside. As if by some mysterious plan, the animal trotted straight to Nicholas Grebe's shallow grave. He dug feverishly, heaping a pile of moon-silvered earth behind him. Suddenly he found something, thin and hard with knobby knobs at the ends. The bone of Nicholas Grebe. Let me show you that picture again. There's the dog, and he's digging up at the grave, and he finds the bone of Nicholas Grebe. Now, just as the dog started back with his prize, a carriage stopped in the middle of the road, while the passengers alighted to gaze at the moon. The curious little dog scampered up into the carriage, climbed the steps, and slipped beneath a seat. Worn out from digging, he fell asleep. And this is the 2-page spread of that illustration. The carriage stopped. I can't get this lined up ever. The carriage stopped. As you can see here, the carriage stopped in the road. The little dog hopped in with the bone. You see the bone there, and the people are gazing at the beautiful moon. All right. Now, back inside the house. Presently, the people returned, and the carriage rumbled off, with passengers, dog, and bone. As they melted into the night, something luminous and white arose from the grave of Nicholas Grebe. Look, here's the people in the house, and something luminous and white arose from the grave of Nicholas Grebe, sitting in the chair over here. It floated into the farmhouse, settled itself in a chair before the fire, and lifted its voice in a resonant moan. From this night forth I quest, till all my bones together rest. There's Nicholas Grebe. That's how I read it to my kids. So there he is, and the candle goes out. So my little girl last night was like, you can see she was starting to get nervous. It's ghosts. It's the power of an illustration and reading. And so at once, everyone stopped toasting and began shrieking. They rushed to their carriages and rattled away, scattering down the dark country lanes like leaves before a wild wind. Only Nicholas Grebe's frightened widow remained, and his unhappy ghost. You can see there's Nicholas Grebe in the window, the ghost of Nicholas Grebe, his widow, and then everybody taking off in their carriages down the road. The ghost began to haunt the farm, looking for the lost bone. Its restless rambles took it from one corner of the place to the other. Sometimes something unseen set hens fluttering upon their nests. Sometimes something caused the lids of the kitchen stove to rise as if by levitation. Sometimes an unearthly wind whined in the corn, and ceaseless wailing filled the night. Forevermore I quest, till all my bones together rest. There's all the things happening on the farm. Turn the page because I don't have Ellery to do it for me. Now, suddenly we're out on this seaport, out at the wharf. You can see the ship and the dock and the water below, and you can see there's a man boarding the ship, and behind him is a little dog. And that little dog has the bone of Nicholas Grebe. This is the dog that stowed away in the carriage. While Nicholas Grebe's ghost searched in vain, the pilfered bone had begun a remarkable journey. The mysterious carriage made for Boston clattered straight to the wharf. There, one of its passengers, a sea captain, boarded a whaler bound for the polar north. And right behind him went the little dog, holding fast to the bone all the while. Once aboard, he sniffed a few sniffs, found a good spot, and quickly hid his treasure. Oh, but what happens next? Just as the whaler was departing, the dog, sparked by the excitement, began dashing about the decks and barking. "Great smacking flukes!" cried a sailor. "What's this?" And he set the dog ashore. So the ship sailed, but the dog remained, grieving for the bone, grieving like the ghost of Nicholas Grebe. And here you see the ship departing, and the dog upset that he's left his prize bone on the boat. And so the dog gets left behind as the whaling ship leaves Boston Harbor. Month after cold month passed. The whaler cut through the perilous waters of the Horn and sailed north, ever north, toward Alaska. Strangely, on the entire voyage, not a trace of a single whale was seen, neither barnacle nor blow. Bored as blubber, one sailor searched for something to carve to pass the time. By oddest chance, or was it, he came upon an object tucked into a shadowy corner, something thin and hard with knobby knobs on the ends, the bone of Nicholas Grebe. The sailor decorated the bone with scrimshaw ships and a present for his sweetheart when once again they returned. So there's the sailor, having found the bone of Nicholas Grebe that the dog left on the ship, and he carved all kinds of scrimshaw pictures into the bone. But that was not to be, his return back home. That was not to be. For soon after, on a night ghostly with fog, the whaler struck an iceberg and sank like a stone. There it is, the bubbles of the sunken ship. As we move on in the story, the very next day, there came a fisherman. There he is. The very next day there came a fisherman gliding silently on a large ice floe. By a fantastic fluke, he stopped just where the ship had gone down and flung out his net. along with a mess of shiny fish. What else should he retrieve? Marvel of marvels, the bone of Nicholas Grebe. Sorely in need of supplies, he rushed to a trading post and exchanged the bone for goods. So the bone came to rest for the moment between bladder floats and stacks of pelts. And there's the whole scene. As the fisherman, you can see at the top here, is fishing, and there's the bone. Where is it? The opposite page. The bone of Nicholas Grebe is... Where is it? Right there. From the sunken ship the day before. All right. The story goes on. Now, all the time that the bone was traveling, the ghost still haunted the farm, day and night, night and day. And every year on the eve of the theft, it settled itself before the fire once again. And there's Nicholas Grebe. Forevermore I quest, till all my bones together rest. So Nicholas Grebe has become the ever-present ghost at the old farm. There's Nicholas Grebe up close. We'll give you a close-up. Nicholas Grebe looking for his lost bone, haunting the farmhouse. 100 years passed in this way. Precisely 100 years. On a night like that, the other night so long ago, a great moon rose. Its pale light washed the trees a spectral white. Inside the farmhouse a family was gathered. The son had returned to be married, a sailor home from the sea. From far-off Alaska he had brought a satchel full of gifts, which he set down by the hearth. Just as the wedding began, a little dog snoozing by the fire awoke. He sniffed a few sniffs, made straight for the satchel, and began chewing happily. Soon he had chewed off the handle. And what do you suppose was the handle of the satchel? The bone of Nicholas Grebe. So there's the little dog chewing the bone handle off of the satchel of the sailor 100 years later. The little dog trotted it outside, dug a hole, and quickly buried his prize, a thin, hard object adorned with spidery scrimshaw ships and knobby knobs on the ends, bought at a trading post for use as a handle. It had at last come home, the bone of Nicholas Grebe. And you see the dog, he's run outside from the house. I can't tell if you can see the whole picture. He's run outside from the house, and look, there is the grave of Nicholas Grebe, right there. And the little dog digs a hole and buries the bone where the rest of Nicholas Grebe is buried. Suddenly, from nowhere and from everywhere at once, thunder clapped, lightning forked and flared, every lamp guttered as if blown by a bodiless breath. Then, flapping like an empty sleeve, the ghost appeared and declared, "This very hour I end my quest, my bones once more together rest." And so saying it, he was gone. And there's the wedding taking place, and the ghost of Nicholas Grebe having been reunited with his lost bone. But this was not the end of the tale. Not long afterward, someone chanced to scroll through the graveyard and noticed something that to this day goes utterly unexpected. The angel on Nicholas Grebe's headstone had vanished, and in its place a little dog was carved in the stone, and in his mouth he held a bone. So that, my friends, is this wonderful little book. There's the satchel on the back cover with the bone handle. There's the little story of the ghost of Nicholas Grebe. My children loved this story, and I think they really enjoyed it last night, and we'll probably end up reading this one more and more. I was finished with the book last night, and Ellery cries, Again! Read it again! And I said, no, never the same book on the same night, twice. So I'm sure we'll read this again tonight. So there it is, folks. That's the book I was talking about when we were talking about reading to our kids. This just arrived yesterday. That's why I can show you now. And an amazing little book. I think, Leslie, you picked this up. It's a fantastic book. I hope you enjoyed the little reading of it. All right. That was a very different topic than what we're talking about overall tonight. And I wanted to read that, even though we're not going to get through our material tonight for the show. I wanted you to hear that book. So, here we go. Let's jump back into talking about dreams and the spiritual interpretations of dreams. And we talked about the last thing before the break was the primary difference between spiritual and egoic dreams. And it lies in their content, how that egoic dreams are woven from a fabric of our personal histories, our brains processing data, and the self-centered concerns that arise out of our worldly pursuits. And perhaps the clearest examples of such dreams are the ones we tend to have when our minds are preoccupied with some ongoing crisis or something going on in life. And because the situations we encounter in these kinds of dreams are simply continuations of our waking experiences, they rarely need much interpretation at all. So when you dream, you don't really need interpretation if you look at the circumstances going on around you. That's most of our dreams. And then our dreams are mostly considerably more jumbled. Their meanings are more difficult to discern. The reasons for this difficulty is that as we fall asleep under normal circumstances, our attention shifts from our workaday predicaments to those long-term dilemmas that haunt our lives, but which for one reason or another we're afraid to fully acknowledge. This repressed material, as it's called in modern psychology, then resurfaces in our dreams, but only in a disguised or a symbolic form. My street flooding with a torrent of water, a raging river, being in a concentration camp, things like that. Those are retellings in symbols of what's going on in our subconscious. And so to give an simplified example, suppose that ever since childhood you've had a recurrent dream in which you feel strangely gratified at the sight of a lumberjack lying in a coffin. Now, never having worked in the timber industry or known any lumberjacks, you have no idea what that dream means. It's like me, I had never been in a concentration camp. But what did that dream mean? Later, however, you might undergo some form of psychoanalysis which reveals the following. 1. You had an abusive father who made you so angry you often wished to see him dead. 2. At the same time, having this wish plunged into emotional turmoil because you feared that if it actually came true, you'd be held responsible and severely punished. 3. Unable to resolve this dilemma, you banished all signs of it from your waking consciousness. 4. Finally, in the course of your therapy, you connect your father's name Jack with lumberjack and suddenly realize that your dreams have been giving symbolic expression to your suppressed childhood wish to see your father dead. Now, weird example, made up example, but that's the way our brains work in dreams, using symbolism. Notice that although dreams that expressed repressed wishes for a parent's death may be fairly common, but they're by no means universal. Moreover, the choice of a lumberjack to represent your father depends entirely on a fact drawn from your own individual circumstances. In this case, his name was Jack. And the father of someone else whose name was Art would have been represented by perhaps a different symbol. Perhaps such a person would dream that they saw a work of art going up in flames. And so the point is that because the dilemmas which form the thematic content of our egoic dreams arise out of our personal histories, the symbols in which they're expressed also tend to be personal. And this is why interpreting them usually requires spending a lot of time sifting through old memories with the help of a skilled therapist. So, fortunately, far less effort is needed to interpret spiritual dreams. In fact, as a general rule, we could say that the greater amount of spiritual content in a dream, the easier it is to interpret, frankly. Why? Because the spiritual contents of dreams are not derived from our personal histories, where they have to draw on symbolism to tell the subconscious tale, nor do they express purely egoic dilemmas. They come from a transpersonal dimension of the psyche, and they're composed of archetypical elements having universal significance. To interpret spiritual dreams, then, we need to understand what an archetype is. In its broadest definition, an archetype is the original model or the pattern that gives a common form to objects that are instances, representations, or variations of the archetype. To give one concrete example, the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor serves as the model or an archetype for all the miniature statues of Liberty souvenirs sold to tourists. This kind of archetype, it's easy to spot because it's a physical object, and it's serving as a model for other physical objects. So there are kinds of non-physical archetypes, however, which are far more profound and mysterious. Consider, for instance, the natural numbers. If you were asked to describe the contents of your living room, you might begin by saying, well, there's one couch, one table, 3 chairs. And so in this example, the one couch and the one table are both instances of the number 1. Similarly, the 3 chairs are an instance of the number 3. So what are the numbers themselves? If you think they're words, 1, 2, and 3, consider that in Spanish, these numbers are represented by the different words, uno, dos, tres. And the same applies to the arithmetic signs, 1, 2, and 3, that we use to indicate numbers. These numbers could just easily be represented by different signs. Say, for example, the Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3. Thus, while we see many physical instances and representations of the natural numbers, the numbers themselves never manifest as physical objects in time and space. They're conceptual archetypes, which, along with the primordial ideas or names, exist only in an unmanifest realm known variously in the great traditions of as the mind of God, Christian, the treasures of Allah, Muslim, the granary of the 10,000 things, Taoist, the Paravak in Hindu, and the ground Alaya in Buddhist. So even more mysterious, at least to us in the modern Western world, that conceptual archetypes are what we might call those psycho-spiritual archetypes, which help shape the behavior and the destinies of all humans. These are manifested in the pantheons of the gods and goddesses, heroes and ancestors, spirits and angels who, according to all spiritual traditions, inhabit incorporeal realms of the cosmos, and whose deeds are recounted in the myths and the legends of every culture. Now, at first glance, the manifestations of psycho-spiritual archetypes found in one culture may appear to be quite different from those found in another. But comparative studies by psychologists such as Carl Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz, and by scholars like Mircea Eliade and Joseph Campbell, have demonstrated that despite their local variations, these archetypical manifestations perform the same symbolic functions, and their stories express the same dramatic themes in all cultures. We're out of time. Reading that book cut into our time, but I think it was a fun thing to do. We're going to come back and revisit this tomorrow night. We need to revisit this because there is so much material that we didn't cover, and we're just barely getting into the spiritual side of dreams. So Good night, folks. Thanks for being here. Have sweet dreams. Don't let the bed bugs bite and all that. And if you dream something that's archetypical, you're going to see the difference from something that is just a replay of events and symbolism. So we'll talk more about spiritual dreams tomorrow. See you later. Have a good night.